Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Fabric Coffee session at Microsoft Fabric Cafe. And my name is Merdat, the community leader of this great community. I'm super excited to have another session with you guys and hosting this session with Jared. So, with no wasting time, let me just jump into my slides and let's see what we have for today. Today is the session 24th of Fabric Coffee Station, uh, and 22nd of February, the last session of February 2025. Uh, so, a quick introduction. As all of you know, or if you're new, we are a learning room at Microsoft Learn community, Microsoft Tech community, and there are hundreds of learning rooms that you can choose based on your interest and what you need for which technology or which products of Microsoft. So you can just choose one of those learning rooms and join them and just get support from your experts. There's a tiny URL in the bottom. You can choose it. You can use it actually for joining. And we are Microsoft Fabric Cafe, a learning room again in the Microsoft Learn. We are focusing on Microsoft Fabric and provide learning, and as you can see, live sessions for all Fabric lovers in all levels. And in the bottom, we've got our social. You can just follow us on YouTube and watch the past videos, the past live sessions, and for the upcoming live sessions. So we've got the LinkedIn page that you can just find latest updates from our community, and also a tiny URL to joining the learning room. There's a code of conduct. Thanks everyone. Please go through that. And we are actually very we're grateful actually if you adhere to all of these guys during the session. And oh, by the way, I know we will have our first hybrid session. If you're around in Vancouver, Canada, we will be actually hosting a an in-person session at 4 to 6 p.m. on 4th of March. So it is going to be in the Microsoft Vancouver office. So if you're around, just send your RSVP to the the post. The post was actually announced in our LinkedIn page. However, just it's going to be reposted if you are missing that. But save the date and time. It is going to be a hybrid one if you cannot make it or if you're not in Vancouver, so we can join online. And in February, we had two sessions that are past, my session and Ritzy. For Brian's session, it is postponed to March. But for today, we've got Jared getting us started with using PySpark in Fabric to transform your data. Cool. I'm gonna just invite Jared to the stage. Hey, Jared, how's it going?
Hey, Merdad, doing all right.
Good,
How about
good,
you?
good, good. Awesome. Thanks for being us again. So, Jared was one of our speakers. We had the pleasure to host him a couple of months ago, maybe in the beginning of Microsoft Fabric Cafe. But now we've got bigger, and the community is just is getting bigger. Thanks for your support, Jared, and thanks for sharing your knowledge and experience with the community. So I'm not going to waste any time. There are some comments, some greeting actually from Adrian from Germany. Welcome, Adrian. Pedro from Portugal, and we've got a greeting from Dekitur, a greeting from Abidjan. Abidjan is where in? Mexico or India? Just let us know. I think Mexico. Cool. So, Jared, stage is yours. I'm gonna just share your screen, and I'll be watching your presentation with drinking my coffee. So, guys, during the session, you can just ask your questions in the chat for sure, and I will just interrupt. I will interrupt Jared. Where it is required. Cool. Stage is yours, Jared, and guys, enjoy it.
All right. Well, first off, apologies for the green screen, but I think my virtual background was causing a little bit of a delay on my camera, so we'll keep that off for sake of keeping things lively. First of all, thanks for the Microsoft Fabric Cafe for having me back. It was really great to get involved in this community a couple months ago when we talked about Fabric lessons from year one. Go and take a look at that recording. Some really useful insight there. Today, we're going to talk about PySpark, which is something that is becoming more of a common trend as people are wanting to work with languages other than SQL with their data, and hopefully have some interesting insight for you today. In case you're new to me, a quick introduction for myself. My name is Jared Kuehn. Currently, I'm a senior data engineer for a company called Heartland Business Systems. We're consulting practice based out of the Midwestern US. But the general thing you need to know about me is that my goal is I'm trying to be two different kinds of people. First of all, I'm a data guy. All right. I've been consulting in data and Microsoft products for well over 10 years now. I've got certifications. I just picked up the second Fabric certification, so I'm certified to the furthest extent currently with Fabric, but I also have other certifications as well. So I like logic puzzles. I like solving problems. But I'm not just that. I'm a storyteller. You look back to this dawn of time, and the way that we've shared knowledge with one another was first and foremost through stories. We did that well before we had reports, Power BI, and whatnot. So I tried to do that as clearly described from my photo on here, which is AI generated. Okay, slides, you need to get the actual picture of me up there. No, that's not an actual picture of me. No, you need to get the actual picture of me. Okay, that one at least gets rid of the gray hair, makes me look actually really adventure-y, but okay, maybe that's not what we're looking for here. There we go. Okay, that's me in a nutshell. I'm looking here to tell stories because I'm hoping that through a story, I can help you on your learning journey. So that's the goal today. We're going to tell you a story. And today's story is again about PySpark. Now, this presentation is made under the assumption that you may have not worked with PySpark before. You may have not worked in Spark environments. You may not have even worked with Python. So before we get into the specifics of Fabric, let's talk about the basic fundamentals. What goes into Python? What goes into Spark? Why is PySpark a useful solution for us to use with data today? Once we figure that out, we'll take the next step to talk about Fabric. And there we're going to really look at what are the things that Fabric provides for you to make working with PySpark easier to do. And then the final section of the presentation will be is intended to be an introduction, which means you want to continue your journey of learning from here. So to get you prepared and to get you started on that journey, I'm going to try and give you some resources that I found useful as I've gotten started on the journey, and hopefully it will help you on yours as well. QA, as Merdad said, any point you have questions, put those in the chat. I'm happy to stop and answer the questions as they seem relevant. And of course, we'll try to save some time at the end for those good old riddles. I have some interesting ones for you today. All right. So to start today's story, I want to start it with a conversation I had with my dear friend, Sven the Skeptic. He is very knowledgeable in the technology industry, but he gets very particular about things, and he loves Python. And he had a conversation the other day with me saying this, what's the point with PySpark? All right. Oh my gosh, it's a shock. It's a brand new product. We've just relabeled the same thing we've been doing for decades now. Because look, Python itself is great. Look at Python. It's a good third generation programming language. You get the nice You get the nice process with objects and working with classes and all those things. You get the community support. Look at all the libraries that are out there. I made a library in case people want helmets for their code. It works great. So why do we need to go and do some new fangled thing of PySpark? What's the point, huh? Okay, Sven, you have a fair point. Python is great. It's been around for decades and it does very well. But Python has one big limitation to it these days, and that's performance. The most engines that run Python assume single node computing, and the language often uses something called a global interpreter lock. That is a keyword. Make sure, Sven, you're looking at this when you follow up on our conversation that we're having right now. What this means is Python was expecting we would get these single processing solutions that would be so performant that with large data sets, we would still be able to get great performance. But what happened? Single node computing hit a limit, and what did we decide to do? Scale up or scale out? The industry went to scale out. They went to multiple node computing, and that's where Python starts to hit a limitation. So I hate to say it, Sven, but I'm sorry. Python is only going to get you so far. It can only really work with small data sets, and it can work with large data sets, but it will eventually hit a performance limitation. That's why we need PySpark, Sven. We need that because we need Apache Spark. Now, if you're new to Apache Spark, you might have run into a situation where you're wanting more performance, right? Well, Apache Spark is all about distributed computing, resilient distributed data sets. That's another keyword if you want to understand what is going on behind the scenes with Spark. By doing Python within an API in Apache Spark, we now have better ease of working with large data sets with the same libraries that have helped us work with data up until this point. So PySpark isn't just something to gloss over and just say, as long as we can work with Python, we're working with data and we're working at our best. PySpark is going to enable you to do more with data than Python will. Sorry, Sven. All right, fine, but it still just sounds like a shocking pun to me. Okay, Sven, fine, you can have that point. But you get the idea, all right? The goal here is we want to be able to work with data more performantly. We want to make it so that regardless of data size, we can get into our insights as quickly as possible. So that's at least the reason why PySpark should be a thing of interest to you. Now, under assumption that you may be new to Python as well, let's go over some key things you should know about the Python language that will make it easy for you to read Python, and it easily translates into working with PySpark. So here's my quick cheat sheet for you if you're new to Python. First of all, hit that hashtag to comment. Not just something for social media, it's also for commenting out lines of code within your scripts here. You can see it clearly from the green text in my example here. Import is another keyword. That's the libraries. Again, before you get too deep into building a solution, make sure you look at the libraries that are made out there in the community that can support you doing the sorts of things that you want to do with data. So many people have gone into that space and have wanted to work with data with Python that they built a lot of libraries to help you out. Make use of what is out there before you have to code it by hand by yourself. DEF is another keyword. That means you're defining a function. Again, third generation programming languages, we love functions. We love building out things that we can reuse again and again and again. You can see a quick example of that in my def for greet, which is just doing a basic print to console to say hello, and I can actually pass in a variable name to get that to be dynamic. Now, one keyword that you'll notice here from the way I have this formatted, indents, it's not just a suggestion in Python, it is necessary. So if you're liking all of your code in just a single line and you don't like indenting anything, sorry, Python isn't going to let you do that. Neither is PySpark. Expect that for situations like defining functions like I show here. If you're doing loops, conditional statements, try statements, all of those things are going to expect that the definition of that routine is going to be your code being indented. And once you get to a point where your code is no longer indented, that's how the engine knows you're out of your routine and you're trying to do something else. Praise be the data frame. Woo-hoo-hoo! This probably won't come as a shock, but if you haven't worked with Python or PySpark or anything like this yet, get used to hearing the word data frame, because data frames are really popular today when working with data. Think of it as just a very simple Excel document. It's something that makes it so that you can get your columns of data for however many records you want, and from there, whatever you want to do with data, you can do it. Variables can be anything. If you've worked with PowerShell, this should be something that is not a surprise. The Python language does this as well. You can see from an example of this message definition that I have here. I don't have to define a data type. I don't have to define nullability or any properties about it. I just have to define the name of it, give it an equal sign, and pass it a value, an object, pass it anything. That is what that variable becomes. It tries to derive what it needs to be from what you pass into it. Formatting strings. We all like to format strings. Sometimes we want our strings to be dynamic. The scenario I had up here is one. Here's another one. That F in front of a string, that's not a typo. The F allows me to then use these curly brackets and insert values into a text string. Again, similar to what I believe PowerShell is able to do. Kind of a cool thing to do if you want dynamic text in here. I already talked about print to console. And as anything that I would suggest, if you're new to getting into a language, think about formatting up front. It's one of the easiest things to learn when you're starting a language. It's also one of the things that can make the biggest difference when you want to start collaborating with other people on the language. So prepare for that future. What I would encourage, take a look at the PEP8 guidelines. This is something, again, made by the community for suggestions on how you should structure Python code, and again, translates into PySpark. So make use of that. It will make it easier for you to communicate with others. All right, so that's the Python side. Now let's talk about Spark, and we're going to start transitioning into what does this look like within Fabric. So the first thing you need to know, configuration. And we're going to look at this of, we're not going to dig too deep into the weeds on this unless people have specific questions on this. So if I don't answer this directly, ask about it. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. But these are some things you should talk about with your Fabric admin. The workspace settings is typically where you're going to be doing the configurations of your Spark environment. You have to look at this as Spark, your clusters are not going to be running 24/7. This is not exactly like a database environment. The intention here is you spin up resources. We're going to call them pools. And you're going to do your functions. Once you're done, that gets unprovisioned. So you need to think about how big of a resource you need when you're working with your data. So the first thing you need to talk about with your Fabric admin is your Spark pools, your hardware. Check your capacity, because your capacity ultimately determines the size of resource that you can create, the size of cluster. Basic logic you need to remember, 2 Spark vcores per CU. And your CUs, the number of CUs you get is the number in your SKU. So an F2 SKU gets 4 vcores, all right? Second thing you need to talk about with your Fabric admin is defining your environment. This is more about the configuration. So I mentioned some things in terms of environments earlier, and configuration is something that can genuinely support people in making it easier to work with PySpark. First thing you need to talk about is runtimes. Currently, there's 3 supported runtimes, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4, I believe. But 2 is about to be deprecated. So there's really only 2 to use at the moment. These runtimes change some of the things about how your environment would work when running with Python code. You want to know what the limitations are of those runtimes to make sure you pick the right one. Also consider talking about libraries. Fabric is going to have a number of libraries installed by default, but they may not have every library that you're looking for. If that's the case, that doesn't mean you don't get to use them at all. What that means is you want to talk to your Fabric admin about what libraries you want to get included. They can then help create environments for you that will have that library available, so you don't have to keep pip install, pip install, pip install again and again and again and again. Kind of a nice feature to have there. Also, one big thing I want to note here, because this is a misconception I've heard in a couple of spots, is the idea of high concurrency. I'll show you that in a demo in a little bit here. The idea behind high concurrency is typically, again, you need to spin up resources to run your code here. Most times, you run a session for a single notebook, a single job, something like that. High concurrency gives you an option of starting up a single session that can be used by multiple objects. Works well, but still has the limitation where right now you can only have that be done by a single user. Right now, users cannot share high concurrency servers unless they share credentials, which isn't necessarily best practice, right? So keep an eye on that. Why all of this is important comes to this message in the bottom left of the screen here, or bottom right of the screen. Too many requests for capacity, especially when we talk of the hardware in the environment here. If you're getting this message, you're probably trying to run something in Spark and there are no more resources available in the environment, which means you can't do anything until somebody else stops doing whatever they're working on right now. So if you start hitting a message like that, good time to talk to your Fabric admin. They should be able to help you understand what is going on and what to do about it. Here at least is a quick graphic to talk about the vCores in general. So you can see per SKU, what is the number of vCores you have per one. Last thing we need to know about before I get into demonstration here is the interactive experience you should expect to get when working in Fabric, working with PySpark. Fabric is going to support you with notebooks. We're just talking Jupyter notebooks. So if you've worked with Jupyter notebooks, great, you're ready to go here. In case you haven't, Jupyter notebooks is a way of working with your code beyond just creating basic like .py files. Excuse me. Main benefit of working with Jupyter is its cell-driven development, which can really help in an interactive or debugging experience. Take, for example, my example on the screen here. I've got 4 cells in a single Jupyter notebook. And the text, you'll get to see that once we actually get into demo. But the idea here is, suppose I'm debugging this third cell. This code section, something's working wrong, and I'm trying to test it out. These first 2 cells may take 15 to 20 minutes to run to do that. Well, I don't want to have to keep running this 15 to 20 minutes every time I want to test this third cell. Well, what Jupyter allows you to do, and what you can do with Fabric notebooks, is I can run these first 2 cells, and essentially the results of what those 2 cells do is stored in memory. And then when I'm debugging this third cell, I can run this cell individually. And in doing so, I don't have to wait the 10 to 15 to 20 minutes for these first 2 cells to run. And I can run this as many times as I want. It'll use the same results from the first 2 cells. Really helpful, again, for that interactive experience. Other thing I really like about Jupyter is markdown cells for documentation. If you haven't worked with Jupyter, you can create 2 types of cells, code and markdown. Markdown is purely documentation. It's an opportunity to document what is in your notebook. This is something I highly advocate for people to take advantage of, because you're going to be working in Fabric now. And in Fabric, a lot of people are going to have access to things like the notebooks you write. It would be really handy if you have the documentation right there that explains to somebody, what is this code intended to do? Is it intended to be run on any specific schedules? And if adjustments need to be made, where should you take a look? So take a look at those markdown cells. In terms of data sources, this is something that is evolving with Fabric. Currently, and this is looking at specifically what the UI will support you on. Lakehouses and warehouses are your most ideal use cases for working with notebooks. Not necessarily that you can't work with other things like event houses or other objects, but the UI will be targeting those lakehouses and warehouses. All right, that's about enough for cells. Let's jump into demo. At least so far, taking a look at chat, I'm not seeing any questions, so we'll keep the ball rolling. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my screen here. Hopefully, at least that's looking pretty decent on the stream. All right, so this is what a notebook for PySpark looks like in a Fabric environment. How did I get here? Again, I can go into my workspace, hit new item, hit that new item button. We'll search for notebook, and you'll see it comes up 4 different times. These are the exact same notebooks, so don't let that trip you up. In any place you find it, it's the exact same experience. It's just the way that they organize things in the new item list. So pick any of them, you'll be fine. You give it a basic name, and that gives you at least something like this. Granted, I've already written this notebook, so I've got some extra things here that you wouldn't have just opening up a notebook fresh. Before we get too much into the code side of it, let's talk the environment. And this is where we want to start talking about what is the environment going to give you to make it easier to work with your code. First thing here, I mentioned Markdown. Here's what Markdown can look like when you use the Markdown capabilities. So you can see you can get some pretty decent polished documentation at the top of this. So let's look through this and see what sorts of things I need to know about this notebook. Okay, first thing they wants me to talk about is attaching lakehouses and warehouses. All right, so that means we're talking about this section over here on the left. This is your Explorer. Very common if you work with SSMS or other tool solutions. The left is where you get your environment information. Fabric notebooks will give you the same thing. And here you get 2 options, lakehouses, warehouses. What this does is this changes the metadata of this notebook itself and creates a connection where this notebook now knows where the lake house exists. So in this case, I've connected one in here. This pin indicates this is my default. I could add in another one if I wanted to, either an existing lake house with or without schemas. And I can take a look at least what I do already have in my environment to use in terms of lake houses, and I can do the same experience with lake houses. One important thing to note about this, for those who are looking to work with these and are working in dev, test, production environments, perhaps with the deployment pipelines that are available, this is something that is actually defined within the metadata, within the code of move this from environment to environment. The pipeline by default is not going to change that metadata. So you might be able to move this from dev to test or test to production. Unless you change the metadata behind the scenes, it'll still point to your dev lake houses. So if you're working with that, make sure you take a look at either your deployment pipelines or talk with whoever is going to be doing those deployments to make sure it gets reassigned appropriately. What does this give me if I do this particular UI? Well, I'm going to do the demo that I feel everybody's legally obligated to do if they're doing a notebook demo within Fabric. Well, first thing you typically do when you're gathering data involves, okay, I need to at least be able to just get connected to my table and to get data out. Okay, well, how do I do that? Well, I could write a bunch of code, or I can push the magic button of taking something like dim customer, dragging it into an open cell, and lo and behold, it generates code for us. And I could run this code, and it would give me my data. Yay! Okay, now that's the basic demo. All right. What additional things you can do beyond that, we'll get to that in a moment. But that's, again, what the benefit is of getting your lake houses and warehouses connected. Second thing we need to know is specific environment. What can we or can we not do? I'm going to actually take a look at this section here for language. So let's take a look at this for a moment. So if you notice here, notice Lake House on the left looks pretty normal. Warehouse has that yellow warning sign on it. Well, what's it talking about? Take a look at the languages that I have up there. That right there for the notebook is defining your default language. Right now I have it set as PySpark, but you can see for Spark, you have a couple of options: Scala, SQL, R, depending on your preference. You also have the option for Python. You also have the option for T-SQL Analytics. Well, the way the UI works right now, just because you can connect your notebook to a lakehouse and a warehouse using the UI doesn't necessarily mean you can interact with it. The key here is anything. So pretty much anything that is in this section here works with lake houses. Anything that works here, so T-SQL exclusively works with warehouses. Python is able to work with both. So we're focused on PySpark today, but I at least want to call this out in case you're wanting to work with lake houses or warehouses. Depending on which one you want to pick, check the UI on what experience you expect to get when connecting to those sources. That might impact which particular language you want to use. Now, this is only for selecting the default language, which I can see reflected in the fact that if I scroll down here, I can see PySpark, PySpark, PySpark. Another benefit of working with Jupyter Notebooks, though, is I could take something like adding a new cell, and I can change the language just for that cell if I wanted to. So, and maybe I want to bring in dim customer here. I can do that same experience, and it knows which language I'm expecting to work with. So you can change languages depending on what you want to do. Now, at least for sake of demonstration, we're going to work in PySpark. I don't need the SQL section, so I'm going to go ahead and hit delete cell over here. So I can just delete that cell. The rest of my code stays nice and stable. Now, last thing we'll talk about, DataBark, don't forget to tell them about Data Wrangler. We'll get back to that in a moment. Now let's talk about actually working with the code. So first thing we need to do is we need to connect to a session. Because like I mentioned earlier, this is Apache Spark, which means it's not running your compute 24/7. It's only running it when you ask it to. So to get this up and running, I'm going to hit connect. And again, this is where you get the choice standard session or high concurrency. High concurrency would be I want to work with multiple notebooks at once. I'm only working with one, so I'll pick a standard session. And if the demo gods are with me today, throw a little salt over the shoulder, make sure everything goes okay. Typically, what I would expect to see is that this only gets up and running in 10 seconds or so. But sometimes the UI doesn't always pick up on this well. I get the feeling this is just going to spin. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh screen. We'll try that again. All right, gets everything up and running pretty. Let's hit that connect. Let's start a new session. Let's see if it does what I more expect it to do here. If not, we'll be able to proceed without, but I like to at least be able to show the starting up of the session. There we go. Started in 8 seconds. Now, if you're somebody who's worked with Spark before, the fact that I got a session up and running in 8 seconds might be a bit of a shock. How is that possible? Because most times, if you're working with Spark environments, it takes minutes to get it up and running. Well, the key here is I'm using the default configuration, or what's called the starter pool, for this environment. This is, again, where Fabric is giving you a benefit here. Microsoft basically has an entire environment of clusters set up in a default configuration ready for people to use. And when you hit that connect button, if you're using the starter pool, it just connects you to one of those active sessions, gets you up and running in 8 seconds, which is great. But again, depending on your use case, maybe you need a custom configuration. You either need a custom Spark pool configured or a different environment configured as well. In those cases, you might be back into what we typically expect with Spark, which is a couple minutes to get that session up and running. So if you notice that difference, that's probably why. But I get that up and running, and I can confirm that it runs by hitting one of these individual cells here. And hopefully this select top 1,000 works just fine in profiling my data. And when this comes up, this gives us, again, extra things that we can work with to work with our data. First things it'll do, it'll give me that nice top 1,000. So if I wanted to just take a brief look at my data, I can do that. There's also this inspect pane over here, which if I open that, if you work with Power Query, this looks pretty similar. I get an initial profiling of all of my columns. So things like my customer key, geography key, customer alternate key, so on and so forth. I get that sort of profiling. I can also create charts directly off of this. So if this is more of an interactive notebook, I expect people to take a look at this, not just for developing code or working with data, but actually getting insights from it. I could develop a chart that innately lives in here. I can also take a look at the resource utilization. So if I want to see for this basic top 1,000 how my cluster was used, I get that right here at the click of a button. Nice and easy to get a lot of that stuff up front. So that's where, again, a lot of these capabilities are innately at your fingertips working with this. And it gets better the more that we go. Suppose now you want to orchestrate something like a notebook. You have parameter cells that you can create. This is a cell that it can be exposed to an external process. So take something like a data factory pipeline or a fabric pipeline or something else that might call this. It can then pass values in to the variables defined in the cell. And now this notebook can be dynamic. Other cool things that you can do here. Here's a very cool article from Bradley Schacht. He's on the Fabric product team, gathering useful notebook and environment details at runtime. He showcases that since this is a Spark environment, it has a lot of information that it knows about itself, the Spark cluster. And you can access that to get things like the default notebook or other properties about the environment. But that's a lot of code to get that. What if I want something that's a little more simpler, maybe something more focused on interacting with data? Two libraries I encourage you to take a look at if you're going to work with Fabric notebooks. First one is SemPy, which is part of the semantic link library within Python. For things like semantic models in Fabric, it gives you a lot more than just working with semantic models. The example I have here is where I can use this notebook and I can actually drill down into finding an individual lake house that I want to interact with based particularly about like dev, test, production. This is a situation where as long as the lake house is consistently named in either environment, when I promote by looking for it by name, I can make this solution where it won't just find the one that I use for development. It'll use the one that is specific to the workspace, which is kind of handy when you're talking deployments. Other important one that I encourage people to take a look at, notebook utils. This used to be called MS Spark utils. It got a rename a couple months ago. This is something that I'd say is more intended for working with lake houses, and it's useful for working with files without having to create like an OS connection to your library or a JDBC connection into your storage space to find it. It just naturally knows where your data is stored. So I get something like a basic connection. And from there, I can very easily work with that directory now with just basic calls that are saying like, oh, I want to create a directory. I want to move files. I want to copy files. Very easy to do with notebook utils. And if you check out my YouTube channel, I've done a video on what it looks like without doing this. it's a lot more work and a lot more code to do it. So take a look at that. Very useful. Then beyond that, we then get into any sort of the transformations we want to do. Data frames, I mentioned earlier. Again, keyword here is data frames. There's two options that you have here. One is pandas, one is Spark. For the most part, and I'll say in terms of performance, the way Fabric works, I haven't noticed a significant difference between them in terms of performance. Also, my data sets have been, I'd say, more on the smaller side. But just note that these are the two different types of definitions you can call. And then we can do all the sorts of things we can do with Python code. So I can do things like I can create data frames. I can create them dynamically. You want to add columns to data frames or to essentially like envision that Excel document. You can create those things. I can add in filtering. I can add in group by capabilities. All those things that we maybe like doing with SQL, we can do those things here. But man, that's a whole lot of code, and maybe I'm brand new to Python, and do I really want to spend the time writing this? Well, you've got two options to help you here. First one is Copilot. If you're an F64 SKU or higher, you'll have Copilot support natively here within Fabric. Or you'll have my other buddy, which is unique to Fabric. And I want to demonstrate this. If I get my... Let's see, where is my demo? Is I want to show you something called Data Wrangler. Now, what is Data Wrangler? Well, you remember at least what you've done with Power Query in Power BI, where you get your data in something like an Excel document, but it's not exactly the way you want it. You need to transform it further. Data Wrangler is what enables you to have that same experience, but you're not generating M code. You're generating either Python or PySpark code. Let me show you. So here's an example data set. And taking a look at this, oh my gosh, what is going on with Weird Al Yankovic? Whoever made this data set clearly likes Weird Al. I don't know who that would be. So clearly this is a data set that needs some cleaning up. Well, I could write a bunch of code by hand to clean up this, or I can use Data Wrangler to do it. So clearly this is a situation where to start with, I've got a bunch of duplicates here. So how do I deal with that? Well, I look in Data Wrangler. There's a drop duplicate rows. And I can define the target columns that uniquely define it. Apply. And just like that, I've already got my data deduplicated. Another example here would be something like age. Look at this. The ages are decimals. Are people usually identifying their age in terms of decimals? I don't think so. That doesn't look right. And also, I get the feeling this is done via text, or that it's identified itself as a text field. So I need to do more with this. So I'm going to do, let's see, where is my, here we go. Let's change that column type of age, because I don't think it's the right data type. I'm going to take it, and I'm going to say this data type needs to be a float. So right now it's a decimal. So I'll hit apply. All right, now that looks more like what I'd expect. But again, it's still in decimal form. I could then take this and I can round it. And I'm going to do 0 decimals because, again, this is H. We don't need it. Okay, and it at least rounded it, so we're back to zeros. Oh, it'll expect me to change it then to an actual integer type. So I'll change that to an integer. I'll just do small int. And there we go. Data's cleaned up. So a whole lot of things that you can do with more of that Power Query-like experience. Now, here's the fun part. All right, I've done this. Now you said it generates code. So what does it generate? Well, I hit this button, add code to notebook. And if I scroll down, here we go. Code generated. And in this case, it gave it to me both working with it in terms of more of a Spark approach, which is this top section here, or I can generate it as working with Python, in which case I'm working with a pandas data frame. So I was able to do all of my data cleansing and have it generate code that now I can go in, I can easily clean my data. Now I can focus on the analysis and the transformations of data I genuinely care about doing. This is the sort of stuff that makes it so much easier to get started working with this code, even if you're not necessarily an expert at it. So if you even if you don't have that Copilot, check out Data Wrangler. It will save you some time when it comes to cleansing data. All right, getting close to at least time where we want to open up for questions here. So let's wrap up at least an initial look at things. So that's a quick look at least some of the possibilities. Again, this is intended as an introductory course. So what's your next step to continue that education journey? Here's a couple of things that I'd advocate depending on which part of this you need to learn more about. Suppose that you're specifically interested in working on this within Fabric. So many resources out there on the web and on LinkedIn especially. There's the Microsoft Fabric Learning is a group out there. Microsoft Fabric Community is out there. The Microsoft Learn documentation obviously exists out there, so check that out. But then there are plenty of other community solutions out there for talking about Senpai. And here's an example link for notebook utils, which will tell you specifically what you can do with it within Fabric. So you can do a lot of reading on your own. Maybe you like something that's a little more interactive. In that case, couple channels you should keep an eye on. First of all, Tales from the Field. If you haven't checked out this YouTube channel and you're working with Fabric, you need to go and check out this channel. This channel is run by a number of Microsoft staff who either are on the product team for Fabric or work closely with the team, with their Fabric product team. And they do demos on cutting edge things that are happening in Fabric, including some of the things that I showcased you today. Check out their videos. Maybe you're interested more in the Python side of things. Programming with Mosh is a really good YouTube channel for learning about programming with Mosh. He has a really useful video out there for Python for beginners. Learn Python in 1 hour. I kid you not, 1 hour, you learn quite a bit from him on more functionally what you need to know to work with Python. And again, that pretty much all translates to working in PySpark. Highly useful solution. As long as we're talking content creation, I'll do a little bit of self-advocacy here. So I also have a YouTube channel called Data Bard, where I try to educate, similar to what we're doing today, but I try to have a little fun with it too. I have some content out here that talks about working in PySpark. So depending on certain situations, take a look at what I have out there. And if you have specific questions that I don't answer today, let me know. I'll make content on it to help further educate you and others in the community. And if you're more of a self-study person and you want something to help you get started and get moving, use the tools that are innately there. Data Wrangler, if you're looking to figure out how to transform data within data frames, Data Wrangler is a good coach. Copilots are also a great coach. Just remember, as always, it is artificial intelligence. It may not be 100% accurate. So first of all, make sure you use the right copilot for it. And secondly, use it at least to start, but check your resources after the fact to make sure what it's telling you is accurate. Still, for me personally, I find them as a great accelerator for taking that next step on your learning journey. And with that, that at least comes back to the end of the presentation. I'll do a quick blurb here and then we'll get into questions. So thank you again to Microsoft Fabric Cafe for having me here. If you want to connect with me and you want to learn more about what I'm working on, or if you have more questions that you want me to answer for you and for the community, connect with me. LinkedIn's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. Also, check out that QR code that goes to my YouTube channel, where again, I'm making educational content for people. If you liked what you saw today, come and take a look at FabCon. If you're not going yet, consider going to the Microsoft Fabric Community Conference in Vegas. We're about a month out from it. I'll be out there speaking on PySpark. So if you're looking to learn more about it or want to connect with me or others in the community, check out that event. I went last year. It was wonderful. I do have a discount code at the bottom there, KUEHN 200, gives you a discount on your registration if you haven't registered yet. Take a look at that. Hopefully, I would love to see some faces out there from the community. With
Perfect.
that,
Awesome, Jared.
look at
That was
questions.
interesting session. And yeah, thanks for sharing the discount for registering on FabCon. Please, guys, use it. So there are a couple of questions. I'm going to just walk through them in the last
Mhm.
maybe 6-7 minutes. So some greeting from Portugal. Yeah, Toronto, Granny. So the question here for you, Jared, sorry, is Pedro is saying noticing many similarities between Fabric and Snowflake. Are there any circumstances in which one is preferable over the other?
Good question, Pedro. So I would say I haven't worked extensively in Snowflake. I've worked a little bit with having to interface with Snowflake and Fabric. Fabric does have mirroring capabilities to mirror data from Snowflake into Fabric. I'd say at least the preferences there, like certainly Snowflake is a more established product. So if you're working with code and some of the things that are there, it's a product that's been around longer. So it certainly has some benefits there. Where Fabric, I think, will give you some benefits that Snowflake may not, is giving you the full experience of working with data. So Fabric is not just about the PySpark stuff that I showed you today. The low code, no code data pipelines and data flows are innately in there. Reporting with Power BI is innately in there. Working with real-time data with event houses and KQL is all innately in one spot, and it's all directly integrated with one another. If you need that full platform experience and you want a simplified admin solution, Fabric gives you that whole thing. Fabric gives you some to most of it, but it doesn't necessarily give you the full experience. So that's at least where I would maybe trade off between the two.
Cool. And the next one, Warren mentions that I was always under the impression that pandas was single node only.
Correct. Yes. Pandas is single node only. That is at least the big thing about using Pandas data frames versus Spark data frames. Spark data frames, you're going to make use of that full Spark environment and that distributed clustering. Pandas, you may not get that full clustered experience. It's a little bit hard to tell with the resource monitoring how exactly Fabric resolves this. I'm pretty sure it still works under this impression that Pandas is still single node. So yeah, if the same thing holds true, Warren. If you're in situations where performance is becoming a concern and you're working with a larger data frame, consider going with Spark. But again, smaller data frames, Pandas might actually perform better because you'd only be working on a single node. Whereas sometimes smaller data sets in a distributed environment don't necessarily work as performantly.
Cool. And the next one, Warren, is age a good metric to contain? Surely that would be a better as a calculation at runtime in Power BI layer, provided we have the DOB, date of birth.
Good point, Warren. At least in my demo data, I don't have a date of birth. I only have the age. So yes, you're right. In that particular situation, working with a date of birth and calculating the age is probably the better way to go about doing it. at least that's what I had written up here for demonstration purposes. But you're right, that's probably the better way to go
Thanks
about
for
doing
your
it.
attention to that. And I think the last question, Don, are there libraries that allow users to connect to different data sources like BigQuery, Snowflake, NoSQL DBs, and APIs in PySpark? That's a great question.
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's a good question. Honestly, for working with those environments, I would assume yes. I have not been in a situation yet where I've had to work in those situations, so I haven't looked at that yet. My assumption would be, given the way the language has been supported by the community, I wouldn't be surprised if those libraries exist. I just don't know offhand from personal experience, so I would have to look. Which actually, that's a really good question. So I'll take a look at that. Maybe I'll make something on the YouTube channel for that. And I would at least say the extra step there is, if you're looking for something like that within PySpark, within Fabric, I wouldn't be surprised if those sorts of libraries may not innately exist within the default environments of Fabric. So maybe something, if you find a library for this, expect to talk to your Fabric admin about that. They may need to create an environment for you that would have that library readily available at your disposal.
Okay, cool. So, and some thanks. Technoid, great session. Edwin, great session. Thanks. Thanks for joining us. Reina, will a replay be shared? Impressive presentation. Yeah, for sure. The recording of this session will be available immediately on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. Just follow the Microsoft Fabric Cafe in the live section. Pedro, understood. Thank you. Great presentation. And Varen, thanks. Excellent presentation. Hope to see much more for sure. And Gnani, is the data frame copied to all the data nodes, or is it partitioned and copied?
So again, if we talk something like Spark data frames, what should be happening is, it's a single data frame. That data frame would then be partitioned. It would be broken off to the various clustering nodes. How that works, Spark should be handling that all on its own. Spark does allow you to have some configurations that you can control that maybe changes how data is distributed. But if you go with something like default settings, like I showed today, the idea is a Spark data frame. The data frame is partitioned as the engine thinks makes sense. The partitions then are copied to separate nodes, which then perform the computations and then brings it back to a central location to get your result.
Cool. So, thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Jared. That was actually a great session. We are done with Jared's session. As I mentioned, it is going to be available on our YouTube channel immediately. You can just rewatch it, or if you joined late, you can go and watch it. Don't forget about our first hybrid session. The in-person session will be in Vancouver, Canada, and of course, it's going to be available online if you would like to join online. And it is going to be March 4th. And just stay tuned for the upcoming sessions in March. It is not announced yet, but we will announce them on our LinkedIn page. You can just follow us. This QR code is going to land it in our LinkedIn page. Cool. I think it comes to an end. Jared, once again, thank you very much. And
my pleasure.
Thanks from Gnani and Michael. Cool. So if there's no more question, I think we can wrap it up. And actually wishing a great weekend for you guys. And until the next session on 4th of March, take care.
Take care.